Hi. Welcome back to another episode of The True Crime Dish. You might notice that we are in a different kitchen, and that's because I moved. So now that we got that out of the way, today we are going to be baking an apple crisp because Mama loves her sweets. I just want to put a disclaimer out there. If you already know this case, then you know the details of it, but if you don't, this case does involve child murders, so if that's something that is triggering to you, you don't want to hear about that. I know plenty of people do not want to hear about those types of things, then I would not watch this video. We're starting out on August 13th, 2018. Nicole Atkinson has not been able to get a hold of her very close friend, Shanann Watts. This was very unusual because Nicole and Shanann had a very close relationship and they stayed in contact very often. Not to mention they were also together the night before. Nicole's a bit worried. She pops over to the Watts family home around 1:40 p.m. and things only get weirder from there. She noticed Shanann's car in the driveway, but there didn't appear to be anyone home. Chris and Shanann, Chris was Shanann's husband, they had 2 daughters together. They had Bella, who was 4, and Cece, who was 3 years old. They were also nowhere to be found, and Nicole noticed that their car seats were in the back of Shanann's car. So it's like, can't really go far without your car and without the car seats. Nicole is starting to panic a little bit, so she calls Shanann's husband, Chris, and kind of explains the situation to him, but Chris doesn't really seem that concerned, although Nicole is like, you need to come home and check on Shanann, like something is not right. Chris doesn't really seem worried about it at all. He actually told Nicole that Shanann had taken the girls on a play date. Nicole was like, with who and how, because her car's in the driveway with the car seats. So this didn't sit right with Nicole, and she also knew that Shanann had a doctor's appointment that morning at 10 a.m. that Shanann did not show up for. All of this was starting to worry Nicole more and more because her dear friend Shanann was actually 15 weeks pregnant and nowhere to be found. Shanann met her husband Chris in 2010 via Facebook. The couple dated for 2 years before getting married in 2012. And then shortly after, they relocated to Colorado. And by 2013, they were welcoming their first daughter, Bella. So things are just moving right along here. By 2015, they were welcoming their second daughter, Celeste, or as they liked to call her, Cece. Chris was working for a company called Anadarko, which is a petroleum company, and Shanann had started her business venture working for a company called Lavelle. I had never heard of Lavelle, but I read into it. They sell Thrive products. I had heard of Thrive, but I hadn't heard of Lavelle. But basically it was an MLM, you know, similar to like Mary Kay or Amway, something like that. A geometric shaped structured company, if you know what I'm saying. It was a pyramid scheme. Shanann definitely enjoyed her work. She had earned a company car for high sales, and she was documenting all of her business ventures and just her life in general via Facebook videos. She was kind of like an OG influencer, honestly. She was such a bubbly person. I feel like she was one of those people that you meet and you just instantly feel like you've known them your entire life. Shanann had been through a lot in her life. She actually had a previous marriage that did not end well, and she also had been diagnosed with lupus. So I think both of these big life events just really put things into perspective for her. And she really seemed like she was the glue that held the Watts family together. I think part of why this case is so intriguing and eerie to me, and probably many others, is because we have literal video footage of Shanann sharing her entire life to people and to the public and all of their friends and family. Shanann and Chris seemed like they were really thriving. You know, they seemed like they were both very successful in their jobs. They had a very nice home, 2 healthy daughters, and as I mentioned in the beginning, they had a 3rd baby on the way, a baby boy that they were going to name Nico. Shanann had videoed her surprising Chris with the news and posted it to her Facebook. I'm sure I can find a link to the video. I'll post it down below. You can also find pretty much any of these videos on Google. They're all still out there somewhere. Shanann was secretly recording Chris's reaction to the pregnancy news, and it was a little forced, if you ask me. He did act excited. It just seemed, to me personally, it seemed a little off. And as we all know too well, there was definitely trouble in paradise. In June 2018, Shanann and the girls were going on a 6-week-long vacation to North Carolina to visit Shanann's family. Shanann and Chris had been fighting quite a bit in the days leading up to this vacation, so I think they were kind of hoping that the time away would give them both some clarity on things. Fortunately though, while Shanann and her daughters were away, Chris would play. Chris started getting a little too friendly with a coworker of his named Nicole Kessinger, a different Nicole from the beginning of the story. I am gonna call Chris's Nicole Nikki, and then I'll call Shanann's Nicole, her good friend, we'll call her Nicole. But Nikki is the girl that Chris is getting a little too friendly with. That's his coworker. So Nikki took a strong interest in Chris. It's unclear if she knew from the beginning that Chris was married with children, but I'm gonna speculate and say that she did know. Regardless, if she knew at the time that she took interest in him or not, she definitely found out. Chris took advantage of the 6 weeks that Shanann and his daughters were away and was just living his best bachelor life. I mean, he was taking Nikki on trips, they were going on dates, they were sexting, getting spicy, all while his wife and his daughters were trying to FaceTime and call him every single night, and he was ignoring them because he was with Nikki. Shanann's not done. She knows something is off. She's like, this is weird. Chris is not really communicating with me. He's not even calling to check up on his daughters. She's over here 15 weeks pregnant, basically all the way across the country, taking care of their 2 daughters, and Chris can't even bother to call the girls and tell them good night. And Chris's excuse every time was either that he was just so beat from work or that he got caught up at work. Like, he's such a hard-working man, he just can't answer the phone. Anytime Shanann tried to talk to Chris about her feelings, he just would kind of deflect the conversation. He would basically just say something to the effect of like, sorry, I'm just so stressed out, but I love you so much. Are you? Is it stressful having a mistress? By July, things are continuing to progress with Nikki and Chris. The phone records show many incoming and outgoing phone calls between Nikki and Chris, and quite a few missed calls from Shanann. This guy sucks. Shanann reaches out to a few girlfriends via text just to vent about the whole situation, and she tells them that Chris just seems different, and overall he doesn't seem like he really wants her anymore. He's been very detached. Around this same time, Chris finally just comes out and tells Shanann that he doesn't really want to be with her anymore. He said that he didn't think that they were compatible anymore and that he didn't want the 3rd baby. It's just so heartbreaking for Shanann. But she was not ready to give up on their marriage. She was trying everything. She suggested that they go to marriage counseling, and he immediately shot that down. And at this point, he just seemed like he was emotionally checked out of their marriage. Back in Colorado, Nikki was getting in real deep with Chris. Her Google search history shows that she was Googling, quote, man I'm having an affair with says that he will leave his wife. So by now she for sure knows about Shanann. Chris had been telling Nikki that he and Shanann were unhappy and that they were separating. Some of Chris's Google searches show him searching when to say I love you in a new relationship, and also, how do you feel when someone tells you they love you? That last Google search alone just tells me everything I need to know about this man's psychopathy. These two just need to chill out with the Google searches. At the end of July, it's been about 5 weeks that Shanann has been away in North Carolina. And so Chris was flying out to North Carolina to meet up with them. The plan was for him to spend a week there, and then they would all fly back to Colorado together. While Chris was in North Carolina, even Shanann's parents noticed that he wasn't acting like his normal self. They said that he was always a shy and quiet guy, but he was being even more reserved and quiet than usual. But being with his wife and kids did not stop him from communicating with Nikki. They remained in contact the entire time that Chris was away in North Carolina. Nikki was actually back in Colorado looking up wedding dresses for hours and also Googling, quote unquote, marrying your mistress. This girl really thought she was getting her fairy tale wedding. Shanann thought that maybe Chris coming to North Carolina would make things a little bit better, but Chris was acting the exact same. He was being very detached, he was cold, he was distant. Shanann had texted some of her friends that Chris had not hugged or kissed her all week, and that he told Shanann that he was terrified of having their 3rd baby. After a week together in North Carolina, the family flies back to Colorado, and Shanann is still not ready to give up on her marriage just yet. She was trying everything she could to fix it, to get Chris to be invested again, but to no avail. Chris was just so uninterested at this point. They get back to Colorado, and then on August 9th, Shanann leaves to go on a business trip with her friend Nicole, the Nicole from the beginning of the story. While Nicole and Shanann were away on their business trip, Nicole reported that Shanann was just not acting herself. She kept saying that she didn't feel well all weekend. She could just tell that something was really bothering her. And while she was away, Chris texted Shanann a really bizarre photo. It looked like it was like one of the girls' Barbie dolls or some kind of like larger doll laying on the couch with just its feet exposed, but the rest of the body was covered in a sheet. It's just really eerie knowing what comes later. I think Shanann was a little weirded out by it too. If that was supposed to be a joke, that was a very weird joke. On August 13th, very early in the morning, like it's like 2 a.m., Nicole drops Shanann off at her home. The two both agree that Shanann will text Nicole in the morning after her doctor's appointment. Shanann had an ultrasound scheduled for 10 a.m. that morning, and so she agreed to text Nicole after the appointment and let her know how it went. And that leads us back to the beginning of our story. A very concerned Nicole, not getting any answers from Chris. She's worried about her friend, so she listens to her gut and she calls the police. Obviously the police can't do much at this point, but she just calls and asks if they can come by and do a welfare check. So the cops show up. You know, there's not really a lot they can do. They kind of search around the property. They can't just like break in the house, you know. So they call Chris and they ask him for the garage code, but Chris claims that the keypad on the garage door does not work, but don't worry, he'll be there any minute now. So Chris lets the cop and Nicole inside the home. They start to take a look around. They're worried that like Shanann might be passed out somewhere or something, but they don't find her anywhere. What they do find is Shanann's phone upstairs, as well as her wedding ring. Both of these were very unlike Shanann, but mostly not having her phone on her, like that was her lifeline. As we discussed earlier, she was constantly recording her life, sharing updates, talking about her business. She always had her phone with her, so she would not be going anywhere without that. After speaking with the police, a neighbor came forward and said that he has some cameras on the outside of his house, so they took a look at the camera footage. There's really not much to see, but we do see Chris backing his truck up into the driveway at 5:27 a.m. Chris's explanation for this was that there had been some theft in the area and he has like really expensive tools. So he said that he had been keeping his tools in the garage and just backed his truck up that morning to load his tools in his truck. And I mean, that's a pretty good excuse, honestly. That's fairly inconspicuous. But the neighbor also reported to the cop that Chris was acting very erratic. Like we said earlier, Chris was usually a pretty quiet, calm guy, and around this time when the cop was there and they were talking to the police, Chris was extremely chatty and he was also very fidgety, and the neighbor said that he is not like that, and that was a red flag. And I just want to say that I am very impressed by the amount of people that came forward to help Shanann and the girls. Like Nicole, she's a great friend because, you know, it had only been a few hours since she hadn't heard from Shanann, but she knew something was wrong and she wasted no time. And the neighbor as well, you know, coming forward with the camera footage and saying Chris is not acting like himself, something is off. I'm just really glad that Shanann had good friends and neighbors to alert the police when something was wrong. All of that happened on August 13th. It's now August 14th. Chris gives a very strange interview to the local news station. You can look it up. He just was acting very suspicious. Police also take him in for questioning now, and I have said it before and I will say it again, polygraphs are completely useless. They are not admissible in court, but it sure as hell doesn't look good if you fail one, which Chris did. He also lied about having an affair, which the police figured out pretty quickly that he was actually romantically involved with Nicole Kessinger, or Nikki. On August 15th, Chris is still at the police station. He is now alone in the interrogation room with his dad, and he finally confesses to his dad that he strangled Shanann and buried her in a shallow grave at his work site. I guess this freaking bozo didn't think that the interrogation room at a police station would have cameras. So they got his whole entire confession on video, thankfully. but he was only admitting to killing Shanann. He was not admitting to the deaths of Bella and Cece. He claimed that Shanann actually killed Bella and Cece, that she was mad, she killed Bella and Cece, and then in a rage, Chris turned around and strangled Shanann. Like, really, you're gonna blame your dead pregnant wife that you murdered? You're gonna blame her for your children's deaths? She's not even here to defend herself. Obviously, no one was buying this. Everyone knew that Shanann was obsessed with her daughters. Nobody believed him, and on August 15th, Chris was arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of tampering with human remains. On August 16th, pregnant Shanann Watts was found in a shallow grave at Chris's work site. Not far from where she was buried, they found Bella and Cece deceased and shoved into 2 different oil tanks. I just can't understand this. Like, how do you create 2 lives and you love them and you raise them and they trust you and they think that you are literally the best thing in the world and you do this to them? It's absolutely sickening. The trial ends November 6th, 2018. with Chris pleading guilty to all 9 counts against him. The charges were 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of tampering with human remains, 2 counts for murdering children under 12 years old, and then 1 count for unlawful termination of a pregnancy. So they really got him for everything. And his admission or his guilty plea to all 9 counts just completely negated the narrative that he had told everyone that Shanann killed Bella and Cece. Those girls were her entire life. Nobody believed that for a second, but it just solidified what we already knew and gave justice to Cece and Bella. After Chris was officially indicted, he was finally ready to tell the story of what actually happened in the early morning hours of August 13th. He said that Shanann got home around 2 a.m. She initiated sex. They had sex, they went to sleep. Chris woke up at 5 a.m. to get ready for work, and he told Shanann that this just wasn't going to work anymore. He wasn't in it in their relationship, and that the marriage needed to end. They got into an argument, and Chris, just enraged, had had enough, and he got on top of Shanann and strangled her. Bella came into the room a few minutes later and said, "What's wrong with mommy?" And Chris reassured her that her mommy was fine, knowing that he had just murdered her. Chris had no defensive marks or wounds at all, so some people believe that he actually just strangled Shanann while she slept instead of, trying to claim that it was out of rage in the heat of the moment. A lot of people think that he had premeditated this and he did it while she slept because he had absolutely no defensive wounds, and her family said that there was no way, like, Shanann would have fought back. He then wrapped Shanann in their bed sheet, backed his truck up in the driveway as we saw on the neighbor's footage. He loaded Shanann into the floorboard of the back seat, and then he picked up Bella and Cece and he put them in the back seat to ride along with their dead mother at their feet. He drove them about an hour out to his work site, and once they were there, he smothered Cece with her own blanket while Bella watched. And then he did the same thing to Bella, and Bella's last words were, "Daddy, no." Then disposed of his daughter's bodies, having to shove them into tiny openings in 2 different oil tanks, and then he dug a shallow grave for his wife. After all of this, he then called the school to let the school know that he was unenrolling the girls, not that they would just be out for the day. He said they're not going to go there anymore. He contacted his realtor to sell their house, and he also texted Nikki about their future together. So he has absolutely no remorse at all. In light of all of these details, you might be wondering why Chris didn't get the death penalty, because I was also wondering that. He didn't get the death penalty because he accepted a plea bargain, which was approved by Shanann's family before being offered to Chris. Shanann's mother, Sandy, said that it was not her right to decide when someone dies, and she said, quote, "I know God will put evil people where they need to be." Sandy is a strong woman. Shanann's father spoke at her funeral and said, quote, "You are nothing but pure love, always caring for everyone around you. You will always be Daddy's little girl." I literally just had to film that 4 different times because I tear up every single time. It just breaks my heart. But I wanted to end their earthly journey on a loving note from Shanann's parents and from Cece and Bella and Nico's grandparents. I also learned something kind of interesting. The show Coco Melon, if you have kids or kids in your family, then you probably have heard of the show Coco Melon. It's very popular. My niece, obsessed with Coco Melon. I learned that there are 3 characters on that show named Bella, Cece, and Nico, and they are named after the Watts kids that passed away. It's kind of just like a tribute to the kids. At first when I read it, I didn't really know how to feel about it, but then I thought about it. It's just kind of carrying their spirit on, you know. In the show they're like all playing and laughing, singing together, and I like to think that that's what they're doing in their afterlife and what they would have been doing had they still been here today. So that's the infamous Chris Watts case. This is one that, since it happened, it's just always stuck with me. I just cannot understand family annihilators. They're very intriguing to me, and I always want to learn more about them, but I just don't understand this one at all. There was no known motive. Even Chris himself says, I don't know why I did it. The family had history of financial problems in the past. I think Chris ultimately just wanted to start his life over. I think he didn't like his life the way it was, and instead of just divorcing Shanann and literally letting her live, let her live her life, let your daughters grow up, he wanted to be completely wiped clean of his previous life, if you want to call it that. And I think this was his delusional way of doing it, and he really thought that he could get away with it. He is still alive, still in prison today, where he will remain for the rest of his natural life. Tobias has entered the chat because he smells the apple crisp. I will see you all very soon in a new true crime dish. Bye guys.